In this edition of Back in History, we take you back in time to one of the saddest moments in the history of Africa, the Rwandan Genocide, which took place in the Republic of Rwanda on 7th of April 1994 to the 15th day of July 1994. Some accounts have stated that 800,000 people were killed in the genocide, while other accounts have stated that more than 1 million people were killed. It was horrific, it was barbaric, and manifestly inhuman. It was Rwanda's lowest moment in history. Join us as we take you back in time to the events that resulted in the genocide itself, and the after effects of such unprecedented scale of elimination of human lives. Welcome to this edition of Back in History. Rwanda is a country with three major ethnic groups, namely the Hutus, the Tutsis, and the Twa. The Hutus are in the majority, having 85% of the population. The Tutsis come second, with 14% of the population, while the Twa are in the minority, having just 1% of the population. For several years, the Hutus and the Tutsis lived in mutual suspicion against each other for a number of reasons. The nation of Rwanda was first colonized by Germany between the year 1884 to 1919. In 1919, Germany left the territory and Belgium took over. Belgium colonized the country till 1962. During the Belgian colonial period of 1919 to 1962, the colonial administrators preferred to work more with the Tutsis and gave them administrative roles over and above the Hutus. The Hutus were predominantly pastoralists who moved from place to place with their herds of cattle and other animals. The Christian missionaries who came with the colonialists also had preference for the Tutsis over and above the Hutus. Administrative and managerial positions were given more to the Tutsis. The atmosphere of preference for the Tutsis was really pronounced. Whenever it was queried, explanations were given to justify the preference for the Tutsis. Recall that the Hutu tribe is the majority tribe with a population far more than that of the Tutsis, but the Tutsis were the preferred and favored ones. This was the beginning of an animosity between the Hutus and the Tutsis. There was an atmosphere of hatred, ill feelings, and bad blood between the two ethnic groups. Eventually, the ill feelings led to minor clashes between them. Later on, the minor clashes graduated to major clashes. This resulted most times in humanitarian crises in the country, leading to the movement of people to neighboring countries where they lived in refugee camps for several months and sometimes rolling into years. The current president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, for instance, grew up in a refugee camp in Uganda and attended primary and secondary schools there. He is Tutsi, and his family had relocated from Rwanda to Uganda as a result of the killings of their tribesmen and women in Rwanda. Peace would later be restored at every interval, and the refugees would return to their homes in Rwanda. But the reality was that even in the purported peacetime, there was still the atmosphere of suspicion, hatred, ill feelings, and clear-cut ethnic disharmony in the country. The Hutu man still held the Tutsi man in great suspicion, and vice versa. Later on, precisely on 1st July 1962, the colonial powers left Rwanda and handed over power to indigenous leaders who continued with the administration of the country from independence. Even after independence, Rwanda still witnessed the perennial animosity between the Tutsis and the Hutus. There was still the atmosphere of suspicion. The Tutsis still had dominance in a number of instances. They had been more educated. There was the battle for supremacy at every point in politics, commerce, economy, and several aspects of life in Rwanda. The country, however, carried on with its day-to-day activities. People from both tribes continued to live together. They attended places of worship together and also attended schools together. Yet, the atmosphere of distrust was still prevalent. Tension and ethnic distrust in the country had resulted in the formation of a Tutsi-led militia group in the country with the name Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF. This group launched several attacks against President Juvenal's government, and in his bid to restore peace to the country, President Juvenal invited the leaders of the militia group for a truce. This resulted in all sides traveling to Arusha in Tanzania, where they held series of meetings resulting in the signing of the Arusha Accords, where concessions were made for a ceasefire and for the involvement of all sides in the government and in the military of the country. While the Arusha Accords were being implemented and while the ceasefire was ongoing, the unexpected occurred. The plane carrying President Juvenal Habyarimana was shot and brought down near the Kigali International Airport on the 6th day of April 1994. The plane crash-landed and the president died on the spot. Also killed with him were some members of his cabinet who had accompanied him to a meeting in a neighboring country. Also killed in the clash with the president was the president of Burundi, President Cyprien Ntaryamira, whom President Juvenal offered a lift in his plane. All members of the crew also died in the crash. President Juvenal was of the Hutu tribe, and his assassination was surely going to awaken the age-long animosity between the two major tribes. But no one knew the magnitude it was to take. News immediately went round that the killing of the president was done by Tutsi rebels and some Hutus in government who were unhappy with President Juvenal. The accusation of the Tutsis was widely circulated on radio and other medium, leading to serious build-up of tension in the country. The current president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, a Tutsi by tribe, was accused of being the mastermind of the assassination. At that time, Paul Kagame was the leader of the militia group known as the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Paul Kagame denied any involvement in the assassination and has maintained this position till date. He has stated that he was not involved in the assassination and that the RPF was not in any way involved. A day after the killing, genocidal killings began in Rwanda. Soldiers, police, and militiamen quickly executed key Tutsi and moderate Hutu military and political leaders who were likely to move into the vacant seat created by the demise of President Juvenal. Checkpoints and barricades were erected at various locations to screen all holders of National Identity Card of Rwanda, which at that time contained ethnic classifications. This enabled government forces and militia to systematically identify and kill the Tutsis. By this action, several Tutsis were killed and their bodies littered on the streets. There was blood everywhere. All was not well with Rwanda. The unprecedented had just occurred. In a matter of days, more killers were needed, and for this reason, Hutu civilians were recruited and given various degrees of arms and ammunition. Others were armed with machetes, clubs, blunt objects, and other destructive weapons. The militiamen joined in the killings. They also looted and destroyed properties of the Tutsis. They also raped and maimed. There was total breakdown of law and order, and the destruction of lives and properties continued unabated. In Kigali, the genocide was led by the Presidential Guard, the elite unit of the army. The militias also initiated searches of houses in the city, killing Tutsis and looting their properties. In rural areas, the local government hierarchy was also, in most cases, the chain of command for the execution of the genocide. The prefect of each prefecture, acting on orders from Kigali, disseminated instructions to the commune leaders, who in turn issued directions to the leaders of the sectors, cells, and villages within their communes. It has been reported that the majority of the actual killings in the countryside were carried out by ordinary civilians, under orders from their leaders. Tutsis and Hutus lived side by side in their villages, and families all knew each other, making it easy for the Hutus to identify and target their Tutsi neighbors. During the remainder of April and early May, the Presidential Guard, Gendarmerie, and the youth militia, aided by local populations, continued killing at a very high rate. Many Hutus were also killed for a variety of reasons, including alleged sympathy for the Tutsis, being a journalist, or simply having a Tutsi appearance. Thousands of bodies were dumped into the Kagera River, which ran along the northern border between Rwanda and Uganda, and flowed into Lake Victoria. This disposal of bodies caused significant damage to the Ugandan fishing industry, as consumers refused to buy fish caught in Lake Victoria for fear that they were tainted with decomposing human corpses. Seeing that the major targets of the killings were the Tutsis then mobilized to resist the attacks. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, a Tutsi-dominated militia group, called off their ceasefire and led the offensive against the Hutu armed men and militia. Their mission was to bring an end to the carnage against the Tutsis. The RPF took over the north of the country, and in less than 100 days they advanced into the capital of the country. In the process of the RPF fighting to end the killing of the Tutsis, more killings occurred. The already bad situation became worse. The death toll increased, and Rwanda became a country soaked in blood and more blood. The RPF took Kigali on 4th July 1994 and Gisenyi and the rest of the northwest on 18th July 1994. The genocide was over, but the effect on the country was indescribable. There was a serious humanitarian crisis in Rwanda. There were refugees everywhere, and the attention of the world focused on Rwanda. But the world has been criticized as having watched the situation in Rwanda with helplessness. The world has been accused of not rising promptly to the occasion when Rwanda needed the world most. Help eventually came, but at that time, close to 1 million lives had been lost. Some analysts have, for instance, pointed accusing fingers at the United Nations peacekeeping forces that were in Rwanda at the time. It was alleged that in the heat of the massacre, the United Nations forces looked the other way and made no concrete military intervention to nip the uprising in the bud early enough. The United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda, UNAMIR, had been in Rwanda since October 1993 and had witnessed the genocide from when it broke out. It could barely do anything to stop the massacre other than engaging in dialogue with both sides to the conflict. This was because the mandate of the mission rendered it powerless to intervene militarily, and most of its Rwandan staff were killed in the early days of the genocide, severely limiting its ability to operate. The United Nations mission was therefore largely reduced to a bystander role, and Delaire, commander of the mission, later labeled it as, quote, failure on the part of the mission. Its most significant contribution was to provide refuge for thousands of Tutsis and moderate Hutus at its headquarters in Amahoro Stadium, as well as other secure UN sites, and to assist in the evacuation of foreign nationals. On 12 April, the Belgian government, which was one of the largest troop contributors to the UN mission and had lost 10 soldiers protecting the prime minister of the country, announced that it was withdrawing its forces from Rwanda, thereby reducing the force's effectiveness even further. It is also reported that the United States President Bill Clinton at the time and his cabinet were aware before the height of the massacre that a deliberate and systematic genocide to eliminate all Tutsis was being planned. Fear of the repeat of the event in Somalia, where America's soldiers were killed in numbers, shaped US policy at the time, with many commentators identifying the graphic consequences of the Battle of Mogadishu as the key reason behind the United States' failure to intervene in later conflicts such as the Rwandan Genocide. According to the former US Deputy Special Envoy to Somalia, Walter Clark, quote, "The ghost of Somalia continued to haunt US policy. Our lack of response in Rwanda was a fear of getting involved in something like Somalia all over again." End of quote. President Bill Clinton later referred to the failure of the United States government to intervene in the genocide as one of his main foreign policy failings, saying, quote, "I do not think we could have ended the violence, but I think we could have cut it down, and I regret it." End of quote. Some other countries and allies of Africa such as France and Belgium did very little to stem the massacre in Rwanda. The Organization of African Unity at the time does not also have record of tangible intervention in the genocide that occurred in a member nation. Rwanda was literally left to solve its problem, and in the process several lives were lost. It is possible that the international community did not immediately appreciate the enormity of what was going on in Rwanda, and when it eventually did, so much havoc had been done in the country. Rwanda was never the same again. At the time of the genocide in 1994, Pope John Paul II was the leader of the Catholic Church. He expressed his deep concern about what was happening in Rwanda. On 9th April 1994, in his message to Rwandan Catholics, he urged them to, quote, "not to give way to feelings of hatred and revenge, but to courageously practice dialogue and forgiveness." End of quote. In the May 26, 1994 edition of the New York Times, it was reported that Boutros Boutros-Ghali, then Secretary General of the United Nations, expressed exasperation at the refusal of most countries to send troops to end the genocide in Rwanda. Boutros Boutros-Ghali stated that, quote, "it was a scandal that the world had not acted speedily to end the bloodletting." End of quote. He added that, quote, "it is a failure not only for the United Nations, it is a failure for the international community, and all of us are responsible for this failure. Not only the great powers, but the African powers, the non-governmental organizations, and all the international community. This is a genocide which has been committed. Thousands of people have been killed, and the international community is still discussing what ought to be done." End of quote. In March 2019, President Felix Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of Congo visited Rwanda to sign the Kigali Genocide Memorial Book. There at the signing, he stated, quote, "the collateral effect of these horrors have not spared my country, which has also lost millions of lives." End of quote. The Rwandan government initiated 100 days of mourning in observation of the 25th anniversary of the genocide by lighting a flame at the Kigali Genocide Memorial. The United Nations has also designated April 7 every year as the Day of Remembrance of the victims of the Rwandan Genocide. There is also the Rwandan Genocide Memorial at the Netherlands. The victims have also been remembered in several other ways by individuals and groups from around the world. The story of the Rwandan genocide shall remain in the history books of the world as one of the most horrendous events in human history and shall remain so for many years to come. How Rwanda has regenerated itself from the ashes of the genocide into a fast developing state under the leadership of President Paul Kagame is indeed a point of admiration to many. Rwanda is one of the countries in Africa today with the highest number of tourists per month from across the world. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to this channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host, Commemoration, wishing you the best of time as you continue to accompany me on this historical journey across the continent of Africa.